Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so it started out when we first heard about Gerry Hutch running for the Dail. I mean, universally people had a little bit of a laugh at the sort of almost bizarre and unlikely nature of it, but it was much less of a laughing matter, really, was it, by the time it came to Sunday. And you were there. I think the scrum was phenomenal, it has to be said.
It's phenomenal, but I was on my way in. So you and I spoke on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in a position at that point to pay heed to what was actually happening, reporting-wise on it. But it looked like he was going to get the seat on Saturday night, the fourth seat, and it looked like he was 95% in there.
Yeah, it looked almost inevitable on Saturday night, and even early on Sunday. All the political commentators and the tally people were saying Gerry Hutch was going to be elected, or Gerard Hutch, as he's now starting to be known a bit more.
Calls himself that mostly, I think.
And all his friends.
Call him Gerard as well.
But so at one point he was obviously 2,000 ahead, and people really expected him to be elected. But of course, it didn't happen ultimately.
No, and obviously, look, I don't know much about politics, but apparently this is, this sort of stuff can happen. It's obviously like a horse race, isn't it?
Well, the transfers are very unpredictable because obviously by the time it gets down to the last count, most of the candidates have been eliminated. So even if you're watching who the number twos are going to, most of them aren't relevant. So nobody's taking count of the fifth or sixth votes. But it was always a possibility because of the candidates who were likely to be eliminated last. In this case, Mary Fitzpatrick from Fianna Fáil and Nasa Horrigan, who was from the Green Party, and very few of their transfers went to Gerry Hutch.
Mm-hmm.
So that what looked like insurmountable gap was made up pretty quickly.
So when I was actually on my way in to the RDS, because I wasn't even necessarily going to go, it was a Sunday, but I decided I'd go in to see what was happening. I didn't know, was he going to show up or not? Obviously if he won, he was going to show up, but if he didn't. And as I was going in, my phone was going, and somebody said to me, "Oh, it looks as if it's all turned around."
Yeah.
So just when I was kind of going in, I could see that it was changing dramatically. So by the time I got in, and there was excitement in the RDS for sure. There was, a big, huge pool of reporters, and actually, maybe we'll show a little bit. This is just before things start going wrong, I suppose, for Gerry Hutch, and we met with our own political correspondent, Gabia, from the Irish Independent, and she had this to say.
So look, transfers were always going to be a problem for Gerry Hutch, and we knew that from the start. We had an inkling that maybe he'll do very well. I don't know if he was ever going to actually be elected, but he would have done really, really well, and he did do very well. I mean, he had fantastic, when you look at the tallies, nearly 10% of the first preference vote. Like, that is really quite very significant for him. He benefited a lot from Malachy Steenson's transfers. He would be the anti-immigration candidate there. But ultimately, Pascal Donoghue's surplus is going to benefit Marie Sherlock, the Labour Party senator, and she's probably going to get elected. And we knew that Gerry Hutch was never going to be very transfer friendly because, in fairness to him, his policies, it was more so, he wasn't running on policies per se, he was more so running on a name. And when you are running on a name, you're taking on a lot of yourself.
If he, for example, built on the policies that he didn't seem to really have anything much as regards that, if he built on it and he came back another time, how do you think he did?
It's literally up to him. Like, if that's what he wants to do, he could very well have a chance. He could go for the next local elections. Maybe he'll get a council seat. He'll be a councillor in Dublin City Council. I'm sure maybe that's a much more easier arena for him to get elected in. Like, Dublin Central is really, really tight constituency. 4 seats, you've got some huge names there. Mary Lou McDonald, Pascal Donoghue, Fianna Fáil can't even win a seat back there. So it just shows you how incredibly challenging it is for him. So in fairness, if he was to take a couple of years, keep up the work with the Corinthians, do his constituency work and the community work, and then come back at it. If that's what he wants to do, he could have a chance. But then you have to have the momentum going for a number of years. And that's very challenging as well. You have to get that vote out. And Gerry was good at getting the vote out this time. Will that repeat itself in 5 years' time? It could be a challenge.
So yeah, when I got in, I mean, there's a huge big press area, lines and lines of the journalists, all mind you, getting pizzas delivered and stuff like that. You know, definitely the political correspondents, they'd had a long weekend.
But there is no real press area in as such, is there?
Like, there was this press area which was right over to the left. So you walk into that Simmons Court arena place, and in front of you, there's sort of barriers, and then there's all this, you know, the boxes and the tallies are going on, and the different areas of Dublin around the hall. Over to the right appeared to be where all the activity was going on when politicians were being announced or if they were being elected. Crowds gather around them, and for some reason, this is a very old Irish thing, but they all get picked up on shoulders and jumped up and down. But yeah, so that was kind of happening as one by one the votes were coming in, and this mathematical situation of these transfers was happening and people were getting elected. So it was kind of like, you know, it was like a kind of the spring show or something. It felt a bit sort of like a family day out or something. And of course, into the middle of it, myself, you know, crime correspondent, and there was a couple of others knocking around as well. I went over to the press area and, you know, chatted to them, and, you know, I could just see things were going downhill for Gerry Hutch, uphill for others, many others. But the gap was tightening, and it was pretty obvious that the transfers weren't going to go to him, but it was still pretty tense, I have to say. And the reality of it was something else, because yes, we've been involved. We have had Gerry Hutch in this studio being interviewed. He's out there in the van and the tooting the horn, and the Boys Are Back in Town is playing, and every day there was another little social media video from him and stuff like that. But standing there kind of going, God, this guy was about to get elected, which was an extraordinary thing. And it was funny because I think a lot of media, I think in particular our national broadcaster, RTE, hadn't really attended to it. It was like as if nobody really wanted it to happen. It was happening, and it was something that should stay maybe in the tabloid media, and sure, he wasn't going to get elected anyway, and sure, who the hell would vote for him? And all of a sudden you're standing there and he's nearly got into the Dáil. Yeah,
I mean, there was a point at which, certainly on Saturday, I was in the newsroom for the Sunday World, obviously, but the Indo, we shared the newsroom with the Indo. And I think people were genuinely shocked, and you could see it on TV, that this was a reality. I mean, as people thought, a definite reality at one point. So before, it had been treated as a sideshow, as somebody, I suppose, in the sort of more establishment political circles, it had been treated as if somebody just looking for a bit of attention, but clearly people weren't going to vote. And then on Saturday, I think you saw from the political establishment genuine anger and shock, because it was obvious straight away when the ballots started coming in. I think the initial ballots were from the North Inner City, and there was an acceptance that he was going to do well. But the ballots kept coming from the other parts of the constituency, Drumcondra, Glasnevin, bits of Phibsborough, bits of Cabra, and it was clear he was picking up votes everywhere, a certain degree of votes anyway. And I think that caused genuinely anger, from the political class, I suppose, if you want, for want of a better term, and from other people as well. There's a very sort of polarised reaction, of course, to this vote, and there is an obvious reason for it. Gerry Hutch has a long association with criminality, not to get back into each thing he's done or suspected of doing. But certainly he was up for murder, which he was cleared of, but there was findings in the judgment made against him, findings of fact or of, in that judgment by the judges that lead people to believe that he's unsuitable for the Dáil. However, they're not the only people. The political establishment and a certain class of people aren't the only people allowed vote. And there was a huge voting surge in parts of the North Inner City of people who wanted Gerry Hutch to be elected. And, at the end of the day, he didn't get it. But we're left with the question, really, what does it mean? And where are we? Like, what does it all mean?
Or at the end of the day, is that the statement that he didn't get it, or is the statement that he nearly got it?
Oh, but the statement is that he nearly got it. I mean, he was, he failed to get it by,
what was the end of it? 100, 800? Was it even that many?
I don't think it was exactly that many. But the point is, he was elected on. He was
a few hundred out.
It was a few hundred out, and obviously everybody accepts it. That it was really, really tight. So that's not in dispute. I have to say, the Marie Sherlock who was elected is, that constituency. She's actually called to my door, not as a journalist. I don't think she knew as a journalist at all. She's quite an impressive woman.
She's
actually.
Really nice.
Yeah, really. And if I as a constituent, I'd be delighted that she got in. Because she is,
She's really genuine, and she's the sort of politician you feel you want, isn't she?
Yeah, exactly. So,
personable.
But I think a decent person and very hard working. I saw one of the political commentators saying, "Oh, she's never done anything, but she's constantly, of all of them, she's called into my home a couple of times over the last few years."
And this is her first election as TD. She was a local councillor.
No,
right?
she was a senator. Kind of
because she was on up front with Katie Hannon. Actually, I was watching it, and so that's probably her first outing as an elected TD.
It showed, but she was obviously part of the Oireachtas debates around RTE, so people might have seen her on that. She was one of the people that sit on that.
She probably hasn't been on the national television. She was on this, and there was other more experienced politicians on it, and Katie Hannon was very much agitating towards what was going to happen, who was going to talk to who, and etc. And she did answer a question,
honestly.
I'd say very honestly, and all of a sudden, everybody seemed to
be shocked.
Go for her. Do you know what I mean? Like, that moment on television, I think those political debates, I always used to remember going on the Vincent Brown show the few times I did, just going, oh my God, I just didn't want him to look at me. I don't know what I was doing there. Oh. And you just knew that somebody was going to get it from the whole panel. Like, somebody was going to, because that's the way those sort of political shows are, that, everyone rounds on one person and they round on another person. And I could see them sort of, she said, I think she answered a question honestly, and all of a sudden everybody was very surprised to hear her say that. I'm shocked to hear her say that, because such and such said this and that, and I could sort of see her going, she'll probably have to, I mean, she held her own very well, I have to say, but anyway, that's besides the point. She was a very nice person actually, and she, of course, Gerry Hutch actually made his way over to her to shake her hand, which was the point of him coming down to the RDS. But before we get to that,
so look, I suppose
we'll talk about what happened before that.
So there was huge shock that Ireland was facing this. I think it was described as appalling vista.
Yeah,
no doubt about it. There was huge shock, and I live in that constituency. Obviously, I was talking to other people in the course of my normal life, people that are not political people or ordinary people, I suppose you might say. Like, they weren't appalled because some of them were voted for him. And as they told me, these are not people associated with criminality. So there's a whole other class of people. And as we said in this podcast, you might not agree. And I personally don't agree. But there is a whole wave of people in this country who believe, sure, they're all gangsters in the Dail. You see it all the time. And they believe that, Gerard they don't believe Gerard is an innocent man who's never done anything criminal. I mean, you don't find anybody who say that. But for some reason, they believe that he is the appropriate person to represent them. There was really interesting reactions. From
and I think from the point of view of people who were more shocked, is the shock that they believe, and it is suspected, that he's actively involved in crime. That this isn't somebody who has committed a crime like some of the other politicians in the Dáil that have. And there are some politicians in the Dáil who have been convicted of crime.
Of course.
But there is certainly isn't.
People that were in the IRA and committed very serious criminal activities as a result. No, there's two things. First is that, that he is not disavowed of himself of crime, and people suspect not just members of the media, members of An Garda Síochána, probably people in the local community believe that he still is in that world. Let's put it that way. Like at what level or whatever, I don't know, but that is what people believe. Now, so that is shocking to people, but still, it's a democracy, and he garnered that many votes.
Yeah.
So
sure.
He got those votes not on the basis that he was publicly saying, I've nothing to do with crime. I've never had anything to do with crime. I'm an innocent man, and people believed that. In fact, he didn't really, he certainly didn't admit any crimes on this podcast, but, it's...
But nor did he say he was an innocent man.
No, he didn't.
And he never has or never will, I imagine. But we'll come back to that.
Right.
And we'll come back to our interview with Gerry Hutch, and I suppose the narrative that has developed now around that, or that did develop around it as he almost claimed victory.
Yeah. Because
that changed, didn't it?
Well, I mean, it did change. I think, look, there was genuine shock, okay? And I talked to some people who are truly, truly appalled that somebody like that was going to be in the Dail as they believed at the time.
But let's come back to that, and we'll just go back to, let's place ourselves back in the RDS for the moment in the morning. And as the day, as the time goes on, it comes pretty clear he's not going to get it, but he's going to come in fifth.
Yeah.
So at that point, I realised he was still coming. And the reason I realised he was coming was because Jim Sheridan, the director, was there. And he arrived about half an hour before Gerry Hutch. And then a lot of people were coming up to me and asking me, was he coming and stuff? And I said, I actually think he is now, because I can see Jim Sheridan there. And I knew that there was a camera crew with him during the morning. But also I thought, well, it's probably a one-off thing for him in his lifetime that A, he'll go for election, because I personally don't believe he'll go again. I could be eating my hat on that, but I don't think he will. And secondly, like I have never been at a tally in the RDS. I've been to other ones around the country over the years, but I've never been to that one. And if you get that close, you might as well go in and see what it's all about and suck up that atmosphere for a minute. So he was coming anyway, and there was great sort of excitement amongst the media, and a lot of international media appeared to have purely been there to cover this story of Gerry Hutch. They had been left disappointed the night before when they believed he was coming, and rumours had abounded, and then he hadn't shown up. So at some point, I went outside because he was going to come down the long avenue into Simmons Court, and I could see some of Sheridan's camera crew going outside and prepping up. So, when you're in media, you know what to look for. So to me, that said, right, he's on the way. So I go outside, and of course, when I go outside, everyone's looking at me. And they're coming outside. She must know something. So sure enough, anyway, we look down and we see him walking down towards the media, 2 camera crew with him. He was just busying himself on his phone. He was quite nicely dressed. He was coming in. There was this, I actually took a picture of it. I hope I'll send it on. Hopefully we can get it up. There was just this like wall of media. Really, like, there was more media than I had seen inside. I don't know where they came from, out from under rocks everywhere, waiting for him. And there was this kind of deathly silence. And as he walked up, he eventually sort of stopped, and somebody asked him a question. How do you feel this? How do you feel about this? Or, you're conceding, or something like this started. And he started to sort of answer the questions. And people started gathering, the media started gathering around, and a couple of cameras come down on your head the way they do and all the rest of it. And you realise everyone's starting to, elbow and all the rest of it. And obviously the cameramen want to get in because they want the shots. The journalists are kind of pushed to the back. And with that, I was sort of up the front, and I just saw Paul Reynolds from RTE come running out of the Count Centre. He'd obviously heard he was outside, and he sort of came round the back of him and sort of skimmied in beside him, put the microphone up to him and sort of nodded. And I can't remember, did he even ask a question at that stage? Did he start something? And with that, Gerry Hutch just stopped talking to the media, turned on his heel and walked off. Reynolds and everybody else followed him, and he turned around to Reynolds and said to him, "You're like a dying wasp." Clearly wasn't in the humour to speak to him. And that's, as Gerry Hutch started to walk in then to the RDS, this media group starts to become a mob.
Yeah.
I mean, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Everyone's starting to
get excited
run, get excited. The camera crews are worried they're not going to get the shot. He walks in and he heads over left towards where the media place was, but he was actually I don't think he knew where he was going.
Because he was facing the wrong count, I think.
He was over at
Dublin Bay North or
Dublin
something.
Bay North or something. But you wouldn't know where to go. Like, I didn't know where to go when I went in. I was kind of like, what's this? And he had nobody with him other than this camera crew who obviously didn't know either. They were just trying to jostle themselves in as well. And he ended up against barriers and just surrounded by this huge crowd of media, everybody on top and pushing, and people were trying to ask him questions. He spoke to some people, answered some questions.
Yeah,
not
brilliantly. It was what are you going to do? I'm going to bring change.
I'm going to bring change. Yeah, he wasn't. Nothing was planned.
No.
And that's really where you start to see why Gerry Hutch would never have made a really good politician. You know, he just, nothing was planned with that. Does he know how to react to the media? I'm not sure anybody would have known how to react to that. It was unbelievable. But at the same time, he hadn't got, you know, the way a politician would have planned answers, that they were going to answer a question no matter what the question was with this answer. So he didn't have that. And he was getting agitated with Reynolds, who just kept asking him over and over again about the special criminal court judgments and about the weapons and being in control of the weapons. And he wasn't going to answer that. And eventually he sort of moved. A load of security guards were there. They were working in the RDS. They weren't Gerry Hutch's security guards, obviously, but they realised that this is becoming a bit of a crush here. So they got in and he wanted to walk over to Marie Sherlock to congratulate her. So everybody moved like
edged across, basically. Yeah. Surrounded.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
And he went over and he spoke to her and he wished her well and he said he'd be talking to her. And she was actually, again, I thought she was brilliant with him. And then he sort of headed out and they followed him all the way down the avenue where he breaks into that run, as you saw.
Yeah, I don't know why you did it. Yeah, that was a funny moment.
It was what it was. But yeah, it was, you know, none of those scrums are nice. No. We spoke about the Regency one that happened in the aftermath of it. Yeah, it's like, I know why it happens, because everybody's afraid they'll miss to get their shot. They'll miss, you know, if this individual does start talking, are they going to start talking to someone else? It's so competitive, media, isn't it?
But it is. And, you know, look, those scrums are very, very rare, it has to be said. Like, I think the last political scrum was when Mary Lou came in at the last election in 2020, when they did unexpectedly well and she came a bit later and there was a scrum, but it wasn't. It was half of what Gerry Hutch had. So, I mean, it's funny, of course, there was people being cynical about RTE because obviously RTE were so, I suppose, you know, whatever about Gerry Hutch's candidacy, but a second he appeared, they cut all their serious political coverage to capture the images of him going in.
Right.
So even the people that, you know, their distaste for his candidacy is obvious, they still want that footage.
And his distaste for them was obvious in the comments he was making to Paul Reynolds, because he kept saying to him, you were paid by the state. The state have told you what to ask me. And he said to him that the questions in relation to the special criminal court weren't appropriate, that he was here to see how he'd got on. And
yeah, of course he was about to be hoping to be elected by the state, and he then would have been paid by the state himself, Mr. Hutch. So, like, there is that. But I suppose, I mean, the interesting thing is, right, he's failed to get elected, you know, and it's novel and so unusual, and that's why it was covered by every single major newspaper across the world. But somebody has to come to a clear explanation of how it could happen. I mean, that's what our political culture needs. You know, you can see even in the reaction to Paul Reynolds' interview, it's so divided. There was some people saying, a lot of people saying what heroic and...
Was it an interview?
Well, whatever. Like, I mean, it was a piece of journalism, right? So there was a huge divided reaction of people saying, you know, so heroic and putting the questions to him that he doesn't want to answer. And then there's another reaction of, you know, whatever, the usual stuff you hear on social media. I won't even bother getting into it. I suppose, I mean, look, we actually asked him that question on the podcast and he didn't answer.
Didn't want to answer.
Well, he just said whatever or something along those lines. But we did ask him. So it's not, the question in of itself wasn't the first time I would have been asked, but it was a different tone. And, you know, Paul Reynolds is in a confrontational tone, and that's fair enough. You know, why not? Gerry Hutch has, you know, he can be confrontational with him, absolutely. So I think people, more than the question, it was applauding the tone of the interview from Paul Reynolds. And again, that's fair enough, because that's reflective of an opinion that this is absolutely horrendous. That Gerry Hutch is, not only that he nearly got elected, but even that he has the audacity to stand, and the public have the audacity to vote for him.
But it's reflective, like, as a piece of journalism, it's reflective of one side of that.
Oh, totally. That's reflective of that tone. And so then there's you know, there's a people who that represents them. Now, there's another world out there of the 4,000 people who voted for him and the many other people. And, you know, they're all, you know, their basically comments could be summarised into, they're all gangsters in the Dail anyway. You know, at least he's a more honest gangster. And I mean, so there's those two worlds exist in this city, not just in that constituency, Dublin Central, where I've lived all my life. Those two worlds exist, and they are so far apart. Those people probably have kids that play football together, you know, maybe in the same schools, say hello to each other on the street, and they have moral values that are so diametrically opposed, and that's reflective in the coverage. Now, there's an RTE kind of, I suppose, reflects one view that this is, you know, a terrible thing.
Well, it is a national broadcaster.
It is a national broadcaster.
So it's obviously, it's not a totally independent voice, is it?
No, it's no. Look, it's definitely not. I mean, it's a middle. It's, you know, it reflects a middle class sensibilities for the most part, and even the coverage of politics is really professional, I thought, and really so comprehensive, and many things to be said for it. But of course it reflects the obsession of a sort of political class, which is, do Fianna Fáil get 46 seats, or do Fine Gael get 42, or is it 44, 46? And this is the excitement. There's obviously, I mean, the turnout was so low in this general election. I can't know exactly what the figure is, but the majority of the country didn't bother vote. And they don't care. Obviously, they don't see the difference between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
Or they didn't see anybody within their constituency that really kind of interested them.
Well, they don't see even the difference between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So why would they care? Now, there obviously are many people who do care, but what does it matter if they get 42 or 43 seats? They're all the same anyway, and I'm not going to bother voting. So there's Gerry Hutch, I think there was these late new registrations. So he obviously engaged some people who don't vote. Now, that's not to say I don't think, you know, the country needs Gerry Hutch to be elected. But it's, the fact is that we have a divided country, and you can see this. This is not just unique to Ireland. Of course, you see it in the US, and the US is obviously always so much more extreme and exaggerated. It's an extreme and exaggerated version of life. But you have the Democratic voters who cannot understand how somebody could vote for Trump. This is a most appalling man of all time. And you have the Trump voters who think the Democrats are child raping Satanists, and they both believe it. And so it's the Hutch vote, while I'm not comparing him to Trump, but it mimics some of the divide in society.
It certainly does. And I think the thing about it as well, I mean, it really sort of upset the apple, or what we see as the norm, didn't it, in so many ways? First of all, here was the monk, this sort of infamous veteran criminal coming back and possibly to stand for election.
Not just the veteran criminal, but...
Yes, as I said, suspected of still being involved, actively involved in crime, and only, fresh out of jail in Spain, where he had been arrested and is before the courts there on suspicion of money laundering. But not only that, he came back, he announced that he was going to go for it with very little planning by the looks of it. He seemed to manage to muster a campaign together. Now, it couldn't have been no planning, obviously. There has to have been something went into it.
It wasn't sophisticated.
It wasn't sophisticated. He mustered a campaign together. He got a truck with his image on the back of it. He blared "The boys are back in town," and he drove around the streets of this city, and he went into the flat complexes, and he went out as far as Cabra. Did he ever hit Phibsborough?
Well, he has to go through Phibsborough to get to Cabra.
Does he? Okay. That's my knowledge of the north side for you. But and I have been there many a time. But and he did that, and he knocked on doors, and he did some social media videos, and he jogged on the streets, and he visited the clubs, the sports clubs in the area, and he did all of that in 2 weeks. When people have put their absolute, heart and soul into building a profile for themselves and community, and still have to go out and fight for the amount of votes that he got within the 2 weeks. And I do think that irritated a lot of other politicians, apart from maybe looking down their nose on it. I think the fact that he came in with this sort of, swoop, he came in on a white horse, and he went away with a lot of votes.
So I mean, obviously that's your fault for getting him on your podcast.
Exactly. And that was how the narrative changed. You could see that is how the narrative changed from that Saturday into the Sunday, as it became apparent that he nearly got voted. All of a sudden, people wanted something to blame, and they immediately turn around and blame. And the amount of people, in particular in media, who have sort of hinted in a way that he was given a platform and a celebrity platform, which I don't think is...
Well, look, I mean, people can have their opinion again. Like, we know that, so that's their right, And we have opinions on this podcast, and that's our right. So look, this is what I'll see about it, right? The podcast is watched by a huge amount of people, so that's clear that is a fact, and that that will have affected in his reputation in some way. However, it's we talk about things all the time. You've been banging on about EncroChat for years, and nothing has changed. So we couldn't make him make. The fact is, I actually heard Bertie Ahern talk, and I thought he was really interesting, actually. And he said, well, I'm not going to moralise about Gerry Hutch. What I am going to say is that I've known about him for 30 years or whatever he said, and he's helped all these people in his community, and that's why people voted for him. And that is, of course.
And he's had a presence, and he's from a large family, is what he said, and that's exactly...
So the podcast maybe it did help him, but I mean, he got asked questions and he answered them, and look, Gerry Hutch already had his reputation before the podcast, but that's not to say that the podcast is beyond criticism or can't be helped. But I think it's even broader than that. And as I said, I think it's about tone. So people didn't like the tone of it because, if you have a certain view, which is an absolutely legitimate view, by the way. I mean, it's not because the questions were all asked of him, but it's the tone that people find an objection to. Obviously, we've been inundated with people who love the podcast, and they probably like the tone. But it's not the questions itself. And, you have to take...
And you see, I suppose the thing is that's where podcasting comes in to a lot of these,
Yes.
Podcasting is a new media.
Yeah.
And I think it probably isn't particularly liked by old media.
No, it's not.
Because it's another one of these things that's coming and monstering up listeners. And people it's a little bit like having going to the TV, Netflix, and finding what it is that you like rather than waiting for it to show up in the TV schedule. And that's the nature of podcasting. It's also a very different medium to radio interviewing or to TV interviewing, sort of traditional, because it is a relaxed place to talk. You're trying to have a discussion that makes a listener feel as if they're there. They're in the room with you. They're at the table with you. It is non-confrontational. While questions can be put to a guest and can be asked of a guest, they're not done so in a confrontational, shouty way.
Yeah.
Because by and large, you're not going to get very far if you do that at the beginning of any sort of lengthy interview or podcast, because you're just not going to get anywhere with that style of interviewing. So it is a different style.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, funny enough, who had something to say about it, have never watched the podcast before and don't realise that there are...
Some of them I don't think you watched it then because...
I watched it even because they didn't...
questions weren't asked that were. But that's fair enough. You don't remember everything you watch. But I suppose the thing about it is, right, is that, you know, Gerry Hutch is a human being. Daniel Kinahan is a human being. Everybody is a human being. And crime reporting and, you know, maybe all reporting, and we're no less guilty of this than anybody else. We write stories about good guys and bad guys effectively. And political reporters write stories about good politicians and bad politicians. And, you know, conservative outlets will write about good conservative politicians and evil liberal ones and vice versa. So that's the way journalism is. It's 500 words and you tell a story about a good guy and a bad guy, and crime is particularly focused on that. Obviously, behind all that, there are human beings that are a mixture of good and bad. That is just the way it is. All human beings are a mixture of good and bad. Even humble reporters are mixtures of good and bad. In the traditional printed media, you probably don't get some of that complexity across. In a long interview like that, I don't think anybody could have listened to that and thought Gerry Hutch is an innocent man. They would have thought Gerry Hutch is a criminal, but he's a mixture of you know, positive and negative traits. Now, the consequences of things he do may have been really, really negative for some people, but he's still a human being, and that comes across. And that's a decision we made to I suppose, to have an interview in that way. Now, people can find that offensive because they want to go back to that
black and white sort of crime reporting. Which,
and I have to say as well that other people want to do the same about the political class. So they want to say Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, they're all the same corrupt, evil, bad people. And so it's the same thing.
But I think the majority of people do want to see and know what's behind these people. They are interested in what made them, what created them, why they made decisions they made, what sort of a person they are.
Exactly.
And I do think it's very educational, actually, to go in depth with people who are operating in organised crime, who are victims in organised crime, to go sort of almost behind the headlines and stuff, that you can actually get down to what makes people. That is very interesting. Crime reporting is very, very difficult. And the older I get, the more I believe it is one of the most difficult forms of journalism. The criminals don't want you to write about them. And they have no sort of really PR departments by and large that you can go and make a request for an interview or anything like that. You're often sort of, you do get information. I mean, everybody knows that we get information of, you know, various people working around law enforcement, okay? And that comes probably with sometimes an agenda or certainly an opinion with it. But to get a broader view of it, you have to look at all sorts of people that are involved in it, and you have to try and understand what draws people into it, because it's an economy, organised crime. It's a massive part of our society and our world.
I disagree with that, because it's not a massive part of all parts of our society, but it's a massive part of certain sections of our community. Some of them live in Dublin 1. So they have been deeply affected by criminality in a way that people maybe in other parts, in other wealthier suburbs of Dublin haven't been.
But you're talking about the victims of crime.
No, I'm talking about the victims,
the community that's affected by organised crime.
Yes, exactly. And in many ways. So it's not just that they've been victims, but they've also maybe got a son who's mixed up in organised crime, or they might have a brother who does something. So they have a more complex view of, maybe not a complex view. They have a different view.
They have a different experience.
Yes.
But their experience is valid as well.
Oh, totally
but
valid.
That doesn't mean that we don't, as an overall society, ignore it and try and, we don't need to know why people get involved in it. We don't need to know why people are,
No, exactly.
Are being drawn into that as a career.
And even, like, is it not, somebody has to understand that, what happened in that vote is really, really, it's fascinating.
Totally.
But it's not, you're not going to get to the root of what is an issue by just saying they're all, and you see it on Twitter, they're all scum in Dublin. One day should be put a wall built around them or whatever.
No, you're not going to get anywhere with that.
You're not going to get
you're also not going to get anywhere with understanding people involved without treating them like a human being, as you say.
No. So look, but then again, all of that said, absolutely, people can say he's a scumbag and he should never have been elected, and anybody who gave him a platform is worse than whatever.
Yeah.
Go, that's fine. But, look, the interesting thing about the podcast and RTE is that I saw the figures put up on the leaders debate, and I think it said, and I could be wrong, and I apologise, this is slightly wrong, but 1.2 million people
Do you want to see if I can see?
watched the leaders debate live, which is about the same as the podcast. So it just shows you that there is, people engage with their reality, their political reality in different ways. There is
over 1 million people tuned in to watch the leaders debate ahead of the general election. I think that it is possibly around the same, although we had larger figures than that.
Yeah, but look, it's not our figures are bigger than your figures type of thing. But what the point is...
No, I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about how many people were interested enough to watch.
Yes.
And how many people are interested enough to watch what should have been the biggest, rating TV debate of the year.
And of course, there's people, I don't know if you see sort of FFG, or do you ever see these posts? And I saw obviously people, I won't actually get into the names in particular, but so you have a lot of things coming out. They're so corrupt, and they're all FFG, and they're just in it for the money, and they're corrupt and this, and like, they aren't all corrupt. I mean, I know many of them politicians, and they just aren't. Like, some of them are Egypts. Some of them, I'm sure there is some corruption. There always is. But most of them are human beings. And there's dehumanizing versions of politicians go through all sorts of social media and media as well, where if you're in Fianna Fáil, you're corrupt and self-interested. And that's not true either. So there is a humanity behind all of these things. And look,
should we finish maybe with the theory of, and just to show you how colourful a world we live in, and really how it takes all sorts to make a world, the theory of Malachy Steenson.
Go on. Yes. Well, I mean, so Malachy Steenson is
an independent councillor who lost out badly to Gerard Hutch in that Dublin Central, North Central region, didn't they? The constituency, rather.
Malachy Steenson is one of these guys who, he started off as a Republican associated with, I suppose the Workers' Party originally, which would be a very left-wing organisation, very the Workers' Party really had split from Sinn Féin over their belief that the Sinn Féin were a sectarian party. They were a very pluralist party. Malachy Steenson went from there to somehow ending up being a sort of anti-immigration campaigner. In the North Inner City. He's a solicitor, but he would have had a resurrection coming from a totally different angle, which was really focused around the building of a centre for asylum seekers in East Wall. So Malachy Steenson and Gerry Hutch kind of spoke positively about Malachy Steenson. I presume they would have known each other over the years. But Malachy Steenson, I think, would have been one of the far-right figures who would have probably been in with the best chance of winning a seat before Gerry Hutch gets in. So then you go...
Anyway, he loses. And, the reason he gives for the fact that victory was stolen from him was that the state put in Gerry Hutch into the race in order to, keep him from.
So Gerry Hutch was a state plant, basically.
State plant.
Because they saw Malachy was the only far right going to win, so they put in Gerry Hutch to get the celebrity vote. Yeah. And now he's heading off to Lanzarote with a big check from.
Exactly, because I was going to say, if they did that, Gerry Hutch would have had to have been in cahoots with the state. To run for election.
Yeah, so Fine Gael. And of course, that was
an
anti-Malachy Steenson.
And an anti-Malachy Steenson.
He would have his check in the back pocket from Simon Harris, and he's off to Lanzarote.
But he's running on an anti-sort of establishment sort of profile as well. That's all that's all made up?
Yes, that's all made up. So, look, everybody has an opinion.
That's exactly why I wanted to finish on that one. Yeah. Because everybody, as you say, is entitled to their opinion, and that's Malachy's.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, we're going to probably park this here now for a while.
No more Gerry Hutch, no?
Well, unless something, God knows what will happen next. But I mean, I think we've had our. Yeah.
And you can concentrate your efforts on getting another gangster elected for the presidential election next year.
Do my best. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.